This is K.M. Wyland, and you're listening to the 490th episode of the Helping Writers Become Authors podcast. So here we are, the last podcast of 2019. While working on this episode, I realized that 2019 marked the 10-year anniversary for the podcast. At first I was like, oh yeah, 10 years, that's cool. Then I thought about it a little more and it kind of started to blow my mind. 10 years. I honestly can't believe it's been 10 years since I started adding an audio version to the weekly post on my site. I clearly remember the first time I started recording all by myself in my bedroom and how ridiculously nervous I was. The podcasts were a lot shorter in the beginning. The first one was just 5 minutes. I still remember what it was about too. It was called 2 Things Every Author Needs to Know About Using Brand Names in Fiction. Quite often, one of you emails or tweets me to tell me you've listened to the entire back library of podcasts, which is always astounding to me. Not just because you listen to what has to be almost 100 hours of audio, but because you made it through all the early episodes where I was still figuring things out. So, anyway, here's to 10 years. Whether you've been listening from the start, caught up along the way, or have just joined the community recently, thank you for listening, and here's to 10 more years. And now I hope you enjoyed this week's podcast, which features one of my favorite of my end-of-year roundups, my top books of 2019. I had such a good reading year this year. It was hard to narrow down my top books of 2019 into a manageable list. For as long as I can remember, my favorite part of my day has been the part where I get to curl up for an hour or so with a pile of books. For years, reading was the last thing I did every day before bed. This year, I changed things up and started doing my reading in the morning, with a cup of coffee, of course. I've also shifted things around so that I'm spending more time these days on nonfiction than fiction. There's just so much stuff I want to know, you know? I've also initiated a few new reading challenges for myself, in addition to still pursuing the classics, which I define as any famous book or unfamous book by a famous author that was published prior to 1970. I've also decided to read all the Pulitzer winners, quite a few of which I've already read via my pursuit of the classics. And I'm trying to read a history of every country. This year I checked off Canada, Afghanistan, and Australia. I may or may not have gotten distracted by histories of the popes and the Templars. And as you'll see, I read more 5-star books this year than I think I have any year, so that was pretty awesome. In a minute, you will hear about my top books of 2019, which is 5 fiction books, 5 writing books, and 5 general nonfiction books. But first, here are my stats. Total books read, 48. My fiction to nonfiction ratio was 13 fiction to 35 nonfiction. My male to female author ratio was 25 male to 23 female. And my top 5 genres were social science, which I'm kind of using as a catch-all term, which had 11 books, spiritual growth with 10, history with 7, writing with 7, and fantasy with 6. I read 12 5-star books, 19 4-star books, 16 3-star books, 1 2-star book, and 0 1-stars. So here are my top 5 fiction books. I've been reading my fiction much slower this year, savoring it, sometimes just a chapter a day, instead of inhaling a book a week as I've been wont to do in years past. For the most part, it's been a year dedicated to finally reading Rowling's incredibly wonderful series, which is rightfully the Star Wars of my generation. So, book number 1, Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince by J.K. Rowling, which I read on October 20th, and to which I gave 4.5 stars. This is my favorite of the series so far, I think. I still have Deathly Hallows to go. Tightly plotted, every chapter entertaining, and then, of course, there's the ending. Book number 2, Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, which I read on January 25th, and to which I gave 4.5 stars. It was just wonderful. Much better fleshed out and smoother and better foreshadowed than the movie. Nothing to complain of. Just a joy. Book number 3, Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, which I read on July 12th, and to which I gave 4.5 stars. The characterization in this one is a masterwork. Harry is so viscerally, relatably, believably angry throughout the whole thing. There are things in the climax I think I liked better in the movie, but overall, it's smashing. Book number 4, Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck, which I read on May 25th, and to which I gave 4.5 stars. This book has every word in place. Every word is evocative. It's an incredible character study, tightly and tensely moving toward its inevitable tragedy. And book number 5, Named of the Dragon by Susanna Kearsley, which I read on March 23rd, and to which I gave 4 stars. This one's different from most of Kearsley's stuff since it didn't feature a dual timeline. The tie-in with the Merlin prophecies was ultimately a little weak, and the romantic subplot was even more subtle than usual, but it was still a delightful, detailed, nuanced read. I enjoyed nibbling my way through it. Now, really, the entire top 5 belongs to Rowling, but I stuck in the other 2 for the sake of variety. So here are my top 5 writing books. So many great writing books this year. Stuff of inspiration, solid theory, and some brand new ideas that have changed not just how I see fiction, but how I see life. Book number 1 is The Emotional Craft of Fiction by Donald Maass, which I read on September 29th, and to which I gave 5 stars. Now, I wish I'd written this book myself, if only so I could share every single chapter with all of you, because it's brilliant. More than just on-point writing instruction, this is an inspirational challenge calling all writers to be their best selves and write stories that in turn inspire and challenge readers in all the best ways. I wasn't expecting that from this book, but I was certainly inspired and challenged myself. You may remember it inspired that episode from earlier this year, a challenge to write life-changing fiction. Book number 2, The Virgin's Promise by Kim Hudson, which I read on December 3rd, and to which I gave 5 stars. Now, I've always appreciated the hero's journey and its archetypal grounding of story structure, but it's also always bugged me in a vague way because, however prevalent and important it may be, it just never seemed to cover all it needed to. Hudson's approach, which fleshes out the other half of the youthful journey by adding the feminine side of things, and hints at the corresponding major arcs of middle and old age as well, rounds out the picture in a way that should have been obvious to all of us a long time ago. She gives almost as much time to the hero's journey as well, which makes the book a rounded view of both of these early life arcs. I found it deeply moving and informative on a personal level, as well as exciting as a new tool for grounding stories in fuller archetypes. Book number 3, The Secrets of Story by Matt Bird, which I read on July 10th, and to which I gave 5 stars. I think this might be my new favorite writing craft guide. Deeply practical, slightly anti-authoritarian, and ruthlessly insightful. It's a very real look at what goes into creating a solid and entertaining story. There are no vague truisms here. The author gets down under the hood with clear thinking and solid technique. It gave me quite a few new gems to think about, some of which I talked about in previous episodes. The episodes 5 Ways Writers Try to Fake Their Way to Good Storytelling, 4 Challenges of Writing for a Modern Audience, and How to Write Interesting Scenes. Book number 4, Proust Was a Neuroscientist by Jonah Lehrer, which I read on August 16th, and to which I gave 4.5 stars. This book was incredibly interesting on so many levels. The science was interesting, the art was interesting, the history was interesting, but in the end, the link between art and science is really where the whole thing comes together in a transcendent way. And book number 5, Story Grid by Sean Coyne, which I read on April 15th, and to which I gave 4.5 stars. This book is full of good stuff. Solid approach to structured storytelling, with some slants that made me think of certain things from new and useful angles. And now here are my top 5 general nonfiction books. So as I said, it's been a year of nonfiction for me. I'm taking it easier on the fiction and devouring the nonfiction. For better or worse, almost everything I read this year was amazing, which meant I had to read most of the books slowly, stopping paragraph by paragraph to digest all the amazing ideas. Book number 1 is Women Who Run with Wolves by Clarissa Pinkola Estes, which I read on June 5th and to which I gave 5 stars. So if I could give it 6 or more stars, I would. Incredibly powerful book that not only unites 3 of my favorite subjects, storytelling, archetypal narrative, and Jungian psychology, but does so in an intoxicatingly poetic fashion, incredibly moving and actionable. Book number 2, The Complete Enneagram by Beatrice Chestnut, which I read on October 31st and to which I gave 5 stars. This book was deeply insightful. I'm a fast reader, usually, but it took me 2.5 months to finish this treasure trove since I found myself stopping every other paragraph to ponder what I was reading. It's no exaggeration to say my experience with this book changed my life several times over. I found it one of the best and deepest resources on the subject that I've yet encountered. And you may remember it helped me with the episode, Are You Struggling to Be Creative? This Might Be Why. Book number 3, Spiral Dynamics by Don Edward Beck and Christopher C. Cowan, which I read on February 24th and to which I gave 5 stars. So this book blew my mind. Incredibly insightful paradigm for personal and social growth. Much of the book is focused on large-scale spirals, which are applicable to business and global infrastructures. I would have found a more intimate focus on spirals and personal development to be more pertinent, but it still provided some amazing food for thought. Book number 4, Girls Club by Sarah, Sally, and Joy Clarkson, which I read on March 29th and to which I gave 5 stars. I found this book such a beautiful, inspiring, and empowering testament to womanhood. I read this book interested in what it had to say about relationships, but came out of it profoundly changed in my understanding of what it means to live fully into womanhood. This is yet another of Sarah's books that has impacted my life. Her books Caught Up in a Story and Book Girl made my top books lists in 2016 and 2018, respectively. And book number 5, Falling Upward by Richard Rohr, which I read on August 18th and to which I gave 5 stars. This is a wonderful, short, poignant exploration of life's progression and growth. So if all of these goodies aren't enough to fill up your to-be-read pile this year, don't forget about my novels as well. You can find my Gaslamp Fantasy Wayfarer, my historical diesel punk Storming, my Portal Fantasy Dreamlander, and my medieval epic Behold the Dawn on my website at helpingwritersbecomeauthors.com. And I would particularly love it if you'd stop by and tell me what were your top books of 2019. How many books did you read in total? Don't forget that if you'd like to be a part of the Word Player community over on my site and join in the conversation on this subject, be sure to stop by. You can always find a transcript of the most recent podcast and add your voice to the discussion by visiting the first post on the site's homepage. And don't forget that if you're looking for an older post, you can always find those by putting the podcast title in the search field at the top of the right-hand column. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts. And if you'd like to support helping writers become authors, I would totally appreciate it if you'd consider taking the time to leave a quick rating or review on the Apple site. Thank you so much for listening to the Helping Writers Become Authors podcast, and be sure to check back again next week.